It's 2 o'clock in the morning, or maybe it's 4. I am thinking of you, wondering what I should do, and I'm finally cutting through this haze. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, or maybe it's 5. Think I'll find, and I think I'll survive. I'm finally cutting through this haze of love. Haze of love. For days and days and days, I'm in a haze of love. It's you. Don't love me like I love you. And I see this will end, and I see it depends. I'm finally cutting through this haze of love. Haze of love. For days and days and days, I'm in a haze of love. Stick shifts and safety belts, bucket seats have all got to go when we're driving in the car. It makes my baby seem so far. I need you here with me, not way over in a bucket seat. I need you to be here with me, not way over in a bucket seat. When we're driving in my Malibu, it's easy to get right next to you. I see, baby, scoot over, please. And then she's right there next to me. I need you here with me, not way over in a bucket seat. I need you to be here with me, not way over in a bucket seat. Ah, howdy, folks. Oh, baby. A little cake for you today. Slice of cake, a little slab, the old cake. I can't deny it. I love it. Good band, my favorite guys. So today, let's just start off by saying, obviously, hands off Cuba. Come on, not even a contest. This is one of the easiest tests that there could be. This is like a basic. This is like the ideological equivalent of the questions they ask you to make sure you haven't had a fucking concussion. That is the level of difficulty that Cuba is, especially this context, where you are seeing some sort of demonstrations in Cuba, the basis of which we have no idea come from, that are, even in the fucking words of the running dog capitalist press, issues of scarcity, of vaccines and food and supplies. The thing you're supposed to post on Instagram is, Cuba, we are being starved. And the answer to the remainder of that sentence is, we are being starved by the United States of America. Like, all of these most keening issues that are supposed to be generating this demonstration are against not the Cuban regime, but the actual cause of the direct cause. This is not one where you get to act like, oh, we're going to throw some fairy dust in the air and say, oh, you can't accuse the CIA of everything. Oh, just because somebody's part of the global, economy that uses the U.S. dollar, and their ability to actually exercise democratic governments is compromised. That's too abstract. You can blame anything that way. This is a direct economic intervention, something that is an act of war in the form of the embargo, which means no trade between Cuba and its largest natural trading partner, but also no trade with any company that wants to trade in the United States. That is suffocating. And even in those conditions, Cuba is able to maintain a basic level of social provision that is light years away from what is experienced by other countries in the region that are governed by our allies and that are democratic and part of the system and obeying the rule of law and having multiple parties and all that bullshit. And Cuba is able to do that even though we're being strangled, have been for 60 years. And this is not even something that has to be adjudicated in the cumbersome mechanisms of Congress. This is something that a president could unilaterally change. Obama was, to his credit, moving in that direction. Of course, you could argue that Obama's move towards Cuba was like his move towards Iran. It was an attempt by a strain within the capitalist ruling elite to prolong American power by the application of the market. Like, we have these places, these nodes of resistance, they can be undermined by integration. And that's what they tried to do. And that was what the lifting of sanctions under Obama was about doing. It was about introducing capitalism into Cuba as a fucking plague bacillus. But it had a narrow short-term effect of actually helping Cuba, breathe a little bit. But this could be something that could be removed. This stranglehold could be removed. And then the starvation and the privation that is generating this discontent would actually be addressed. It would actually be addressed. Of course, the deal that the United States is making is, look, we will stop strangling you and allow you to get access to all these nice vaccines and all this nice trade, but only if you overthrow a revolutionary government and replace it with the capitalist algorithm. Unless you pull out the fucking software and replace it with the market. That is the deal. That's always been the deal. That was the deal under Obama. It was like lure more flies with honey type situation. But the same goal, to destroy any organized social opposition that has the ability to express itself in something as meaningful as a state. And Cuba has punched so far above its weight internationally. Cuban foreign policy and Cuban foreign policy is more responsible, directly responsible, for the end of apartheid in South Africa and the end of like late colonialism. The last vestiges of it, like from the Portuguese. Was the direct result of an independent Castro foreign policy of military aid to Marxist revolutionary formations, specifically in Angola, where the Angolan Marxists fought with the regular Cuban military and some Russian advisors a months-long standing battle with the puppet Angolan rebels and the South African military, which until that point had been undefeated in conflicts with native African military units of any kind. And they fought him to a standstill, and it was sort of the end of the line. And it was when the smarter Boers started to realize that they needed to negotiate an exit from the thing. And that was because Castro pushed back and was able to organize a military force that was literally fighting an ideological war. It was not participating in a resource grasp on behalf of imperialism. That part of power cannot allow it to persist. And right now, it's more soft power, thanks to the Cuban investment in medicine and medical knowledge in the form of doctors who they send all over the world, which is a source of revenue for the state and also is a soft power projection. No good. They got to go. And the difference between Trump and Obama on it is a difference of tactics. It's a difference of what policy do we pursue? And Biden looks like he's going to just take the easy road out and keep the brick on the accelerator. Because, hey, maybe coronavirus is the fucking last straw. Because they've been holding it together, God love them, But it's been in the face of real difficulty and sustained economic pain at the heart of the system, like poverty that has not been eradicated. And that undermines the regime. It has to. It makes it more brittle and less democratic by definition. But that still means that it is a progressive force in the world and has to be totally defended. Because if we did take our boot off of the neck, Cuba would fucking do better. If we took the fucking boot off the neck, if we stopped doing undeclared warfare on Cuba, and since that's the only course of action that matters, is get rid of the sanctions. The only thing that's in the American power to do, and the imperative morally, because it's the actual direct cause of this suffering. Like, if you want to be a bleeding heart and say the thing that matters is what will stop suffering, then the answer is simple. This ending the sanctions will stop the suffering. Because that's the direct cause. It's like, once again, this is an easy test to pass. It is the lowest difficulty level. And yet people are fucking it up. They're botching it. They're bungling it. And it's like, what is the matter with you fucking idiots? No, end the fucking embargo. You don't need to have any opinion on the fucking Cuban government. You don't need to know anything. And by the way, you can't know anything. What are you? You're looking through the fucking the dog asshole of the internet to try to find out what's going on. You see a fucking picture of some people marching somewhere and you think you know where it is? We are way past wag the dog territory. This is a totally synthetic reality you're viewing through the fucking social media lens. It is a funhouse mirror. And of course, since this is such an easy question, the only way you get to the dumb way that you fuck yourself over by deciding that you have to have a morally correct interpretation of the Cuban government is because you are too agitated on the question of politics and too in need to justify yourself. Because you're disengaged, because you're not doing politics in your life, you're doing it in this fantasy firmament. And that means you have to convince yourself that it matters what your opinion is of the fucking Cuban government. It does not matter in any sense what anyone's opinion, their discrete opinion on Cuba is. It does not. There's nothing you can do with that information that can mean anything anywhere. Meanwhile, there are things you might be able to do about the fucking embargo, like organize around it politically. Turn it into an issue that you connect to other issues to build inner solidarity and notions of actions on behalf of, the way that like the Scottish dock workers wouldn't unload, Chilean wine after Pinochet overthrew Allende. There's something you can do, even if it is like, liberal NGOist activism. You could still maybe get something done because this is an option. This is just the U.S. doing what it's doing because nothing is stopping it. You could change the equation for power to be like, all right, fine, let them up. We know during Obama that there was a crack there. Just give them some room to breathe. Yes, of course, now they're going to have to deal with the fact that with that will definitely come an increased marketization of their economy. But maybe the Cuban state, by persisting for all those years, is going to be able to actually manage it and not be overwhelmed by it, the way that, say, that the Chinese state was. We don't know, but we have to see. And if we want to see, we can do one thing, like I said, end the embargo. Having opinions about the objective merit of the Cuban government, whether it needs reforms or not, is an opinion that will do you no good in a literal sense. There's nothing for you to do with that opinion except have it and then bat it around like a fucking kitten in an enclosure trying to keep themselves from going insane with boredom. And that is why this is the kind of question that captivates certain people on here. Why they decide that it becomes a litmus test and a hill they're going to die on. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to give fuel to these malign actors. But it's because for these people, for a certain number of people who comprise the online left and its media sphere, and the specific audience that they appeal to, you're not talking about some generalized group, a cross-section. You're not generalizing about a cross-section of people online expressing leftist opinions who might do something about them if they thought there was something they could do. This is a subsection of people. And I would define this group of people, the people who obsess about stuff like how much I should condemn this regime, are people who are coming to left politics as it is merging with culture from the culture side of the equation, from the culture end. I think that the culture of the online left, which has now become inextricably linked to popular culture, to the mainstream conception of popular culture, is creating the what we think of as the online left, and that what is expressed in its media. So some of them, the ones who make the most like salient media creations, like the people who do podcasts, the people who post the most, the people whose posts other people read, the most motivated, those people are coming at this fusion of culture and politics from politics. They are thinking of themselves as political subjects who also engage in popular culture and popular media, mainstream style, and are pumping their investment, investing their time spent in popular culture with their politics because they're feeling an excess of political feeling. And they feel like they should be doing something politically because of how much they're agitated by the state of things and how much they want to change things. And so they put that when they write about popular culture, and then when they write popular culture by becoming the people who staff shows and write scripts that get made into movies, and the people who make the conversation of the day and form what is like the correct opinions to have, are doing so out of this agitation, this political agitation that is driving them to make their consumption and production of culture more politically defined. And this is as the rituals of politics become entirely spectacle-based. So everybody is just doing this as a spectacle. We are all fully invested in this thing called politics at a level of spectacle. So the people who are making the left are being agitated to politics, to culture from politics. But a big chunk of the people who make up the audience for this stuff, and now the producers of it, they aren't coming at it from that perspective. They're people who would otherwise be either apolitical or right-wing, who are fully invested in popular culture and the consumption of it as part of their identity. The way that these politics people think of themselves as political, these people think of themselves as consumers of this culture. Like the busy bees, people like me, we are coming at culture from politics as stymied political subjects. These people who watch some of this stuff and are now making it come at this convergence as people who want to consume culture. They want to watch Marvel movies. They want to play video games. They want to watch and when they want to feel like they're smart, they want to watch prestige TV shows. They want to live in the clubhouse. They don't want to grow up. They want to be Toys R Us kids. Because of course, who wouldn't? It is in my opinion, a more rational in many ways decision to be like that than to fantasize that you have some sort of political subjectivity and then try to act from it through your cultural consumption. But what the problem with being that is that you're being led into politics. You are forced to become a political subject because The people around you consuming and making culture are more and more obsessed with politics. And you have to fit in that somewhere. Now, that is where you get the entire social base of like the disaggregated, downwardly mobile, white male internet user. That's where you get the right-wing ones. People who just want to fucking they just want to consume culture as identity. They don't care about politics, but eventually they have to. And that reactionary process becomes the formation of this defined alternative to a counterculture defined by this new mainstream of culture. But not everybody is going to relate to that rejection. They're going to accept it. It's either because they're white males who have been acculturated to have certain values, or because they're not white males. And therefore they're alienated from that. And therefore they find something comforting in the validation of an increasingly accepting and multicultural mainstream. They find it more enticing than alienating, whereas the future groypers find it more alienating than enticing. And then there are the white males within it who are able to say, well, I'm one of the good ones, so I get to be in the good part with the good people. And those people who are coming at that from culture, they don't want politics to mean anything. They want to turn politics into another thing that they consume as a spectator. Like the video games they play, like the movies they watch, and that argue about. Hey, I want to be on the internet all the time arguing about something. I would rather it be video games and movies. But since it has to be politics, then I'm going to pick a side and I'm going to watch it try to own somebody else. And that is where the debate culture of online leftism comes from. Is we need a spectacle to make out of this because that's all we really care about. But because they're consumers of left content, because they have to be, if they want to be on the right side of it, if they want to be enjoyers of the mainstream, because they want to see the big stuff, they want to enjoy earnestly the major productions, the huge capital-infused spectacles, the high-calorie, high-density of nutrient shit that makes up their cultural diet, like blockbuster movies and entertainment. They want to be able to agree with it and root for it and love it, not define themselves by how much they hate it. And so that means they always have to find a way whereby the more and more imposed political correctness, they have to find more and more ways to keep it interesting for themselves because they don't really care. They're not anxious the way that the producers of this stuff are. They just want to party. They just want to fucking grill. They want to watch their stories. And if their stories have to be politics, they want it to be a guy who looks like them telling them that all they have to do is root for the Democratic Party and then spend their times deciding what the right opinions are on things. Which is just like watching a TV show and then commenting with other people and deciding how good it is or not, which is everything else that is their cultural consumption, and it is what they want out of their cultural consumption, and they're going to turn politics into that production because they want it. They will create a market for it, and someone will fill that gap, and now that gap is being filled, and so when something happens like demonstrations in Cuba. You get to have a week-long argument about how much you should support the Cuban government, what the exact balance of opinions you should have, how much, because you're imagining that you're in an argument with somebody and that there is some sort of judge there to tell you who's right or wrong and that you're going to get a good grade and a shiny apple. You're going to be rewarded by your superego. You're going to get a little boost from your superego for denying yourself. And that really is determining, I think, the that's determined like this new fascinating online culture around debate and around hypothetical situations and these free floating questions of like responsibility that have nothing to do with anyone's lived experience, that can't relate to anyone's lived experience, that are designed to keep you occupied about something else because you're not actually a politically engaged subject. You just think you are. You are still a full consumer. And what you're consuming is a debate that is the same as your shows and is the same as your video games. And the existence of these people, they're just the mirror image of people who have turned online politics into a place for them to exercise their guilt. That's the other side of the coin. These are the producers because they're the more anxious, the more politically identified ones. But they're still operating out of a desire to consume a spectacle and gain enjoyment of it. From one end or the other of either indulgence or the pleasure of self-denial. Neo-Puritan or I guess, high Anglican. Like the earthy land, the earthy sensual rule of the feudal landowner, or the flesh-scouring Puritan abstemiousness of the capitalist, of the urban bourgeois in his counting house, reading his Bible over and over again, trying to convince himself that God is real by scaring himself because he's been disconnected from any felt conception of faith. I would say that what the Amish lack to truly be like a effective uh, like counterweight, like a behavioral norm to adopt is that you need, it needs to be more, uh, frankly, evangelical in the sense that it needs to be a recruiting faith. It can't be a sort of turned inward thing because that's just neo-Fourierism. That's just you're back to the Owenite uh, model, and like it can't sustain itself. Oh, I didn't want to forget. I'm glad I almost forgot this. So we're gonna start Black Jacobin on Wednesday. First three chapters of Black Jacobin. The first three chapters of Black Jacobin will be discussed on Wednesday. Three chapters 1 through 3 of Black Jacobin. Not very long. It moves. It's a very, very, very easy to read book. It's absolutely, the sentences just pull you in. But that, but it suffices to say that the fact that this online leftism that people are part of is fully invested with the logic of the logic of capitalism at a base level. Uh, every incentive uh, of everyone participating in what we think of as the online left is doing so, is uh, being pushed along, by being motivated by capitalist imperatives. Not because anyone is choosing that, but because that's the only those are the only signals that get priced, that get noticed. Like if the extent of our political subjectivity is engaging in public conversation in a social media space where we are the product being made, where we are both the performer of culture and the producer and consumer of it at the same time. Uh, oh boy. Oh, I completely lost my train of thought, but that's fine. It happens sometimes. Somebody can remind me what I was saying. That'd be helpful, but I don't know. Oh, right. That's that we are coming to do this job of consuming and producing our personalities online because and the only way we can succeed at it is to try to make it entertaining, keeping our eyes on it. Like we're building our political identity to the degree that we're spending time on this app, on these apps, listening to these things, having these conversations. Like we're building a thing out of our desire, but not our desire to do, our desire to avoid doing. And that's not our fault because everything is hopeless. Everything truly is, in an objective sense, hopeless. But we are still here and still have to live. And within capitalist structures, counter hegemonic concentrations emerge. They really do. But we're not there yet. I think the Bernie campaign proved that conclusively. We have not given birth to structures that can generate their own incentives that are outside of the capitalist selfish one. Because right now, that is what we're all operating out of. And everybody, to some extent, is trying to be, at a certain level, like what the most indulgent debate guys want people to be, which is fully invested in politics as a place to gain emotional catharsis through identity formation. And the way that you lose yourself in a narrative, the way that you get to, the same way you get to pretend to be one of the Avengers and invest yourself in the story arc of fucking Captain America, you get to invest yourself in the battles between the different YouTubers. And they're different, and every time they come together to fight, it's like the third act of a Marvel movie. And in that realm where you don't have any emotional connection to these concepts, where you don't have any commitment to them beyond them as a spectacle, all questions become academic, because all you're doing is picking who is right by who is smartest, just imposing a ideological meritocracy. I am not conservative because I'm smarter than them. And here's the proof that I'm able to out-argue them. Even though these arguments aren't purely meaningless rituals where you just pick a side and invest yourself in it with the surety of of like belief, but obscured by your absolute faith in empirical reality. And of course, this is where I have to once again come back to the supreme anxiety I feel as someone who is part of this same structure. Like, how do I justify myself within this structure in a way that is not purely self-interested, in a way that does not privilege my personal narrow self-interest over a greater interest that I could be serving? And I don't know, you can't see the back of your own head. You got to take some faith that that something feels right. It gets to that level, and then when we all govern ourselves that way, and we just ignore it because the implications are too scary. If we really accepted the fact that the final decision making that we have is not done rationally or logically or consciously, that what the final determiner is outside of our senses, is felt in the stomach, we would maybe stop to figure what generates that feeling. And instead of just believing that we've talked ourselves to an act, because I don't think we ever talk ourselves to an act. Because at a certain point, our logic becomes so abstract that it loses our ability to discern it. The way that there is a distance between the end of a nerve and where it's processed in the brain, and that delay creates a spot in between the two points where it's lost, where discrete like levels of intensity of perception kick over into a greater perception, which is what consciousness is, when it arises out as an emergent property from sense perception. But that creates a black hole. I said this in a previous blog. There's a black hole where in one end goes unperceived stimuli, and at the other end comes our words for it, our visual conception of it in our head, our symbolic representation of it in our head. What comes flying out of that is not, there is no chain of evidence between those 2 points because of that lacuna that we talk about. And that is the root of free will. Because at a certain level, our consciousness is guessing at what reality is. Every second, it's making a guess about what the real world is. And the degree to which it understands the world around it, it affirms to its body senses. It affirms to what its body is being told by the world around it. But every moment, it's flying out of this hole as we're being shaken and banged around like fucking like socks in a dryer. We're just banging around the world, guessing in every moment what the world is around us, filling in the gaps created by our minds. And we're guessing together. And all of our communication is an attempt to guess together what the world actually is. But we're guessing and we're banging against it. And we're creating these things called consciousnesses and these illusions of a self-perpetuating identity that pilots us through a reality that is not real, that is at an angle, that is orthogonal to the real world of determined conditions. And so while we are determined over time in an arc, in general patterns of entropy and physical reactions, cause and effect, we're all being piloted by these demons, these ghosts of consciousness that are guessing at what the world is. And that means they're pressing against the determining structures. And it is in that space, that little pocket of air, that all human consciousness emerges from. And the world as is, the world that we all experience individually, incorrectly, could be experienced collectively. And that is the drive for the world spirit. That is the world spirit coming into awareness of itself. That is the whole process of the human mind dealing with the condition of consciousness in a physical world and trying to make sense of the world through the skein, through that veil of ignorance that we have about our own condition. And so everybody is getting the wrong thing. So we keep banging around and making the thing more and more out of shape. But if we're all experiencing it simultaneously, if we are all living in the same imagined world, it is there at that point symmetrical with the universe. You have locked it back into being, and that is, of course, that is the moment of total transformation. That, of course, none of us will see. It's important to note. That is, I guess you could theoretically argue that, like, since if everything that could happen has happened somewhere, if you take that principle, then somewhere, somehow, at some point, that happened, where we achieved a final species-wide communion with the galaxy and the universe. But that doesn't mean that the world we're living in is going to end that way. In fact, very, 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 very unlikely to be the case. Very, very, very unlikely to be the case. And say that human civilization winks out, all the other galactic civilizations that might exist all flare up, go out. There's never is like a moment of species being, of species awareness and transcendence. We all just eventually die out. The robots run out of battery. The Earth loses its ability to sustain us. We just cough it up. All subsequent life on Earth also fails to cohere that way. All other consciousnesses emerge and break up under ecological strain. And then the fucking sun expands, incinerates Earth, and the whole thing is over. Wiped from the galaxy anyway. Say that happens in this universe. At the end of this universe, all matter will have been expended, right? You'll reach a point of absolute static moment, right? Like all entropy has been extinguished in the system, right? So all matter, energy has been unwound. Matter is no longer extant. That condition is the condition of the Big Bang. So you don't get a big crunch and you don't get a steady state. You get another eruption. You get another Big Bang. Now, is that Big Bang going to create the exact same universe that just extinguished itself? I don't think so, because I think that's the same gap that we live in. So that means that the next one is going to be different. Maybe when Roland finds himself crossing the desert to follow the man in black, he looks down and he has the Horn of Eld this time. You know what I mean? And so that means that our moral imperative in life, the one that will keep us in harmony with ourselves and the world around us, is in seeking to build a world that leaves a trace that can be found elsewhere in the galaxy, where we can build experiences, not just institutions and structures, but experiences that imprint themselves in the galaxy in our fucking, in the ricochet of atoms, imprint that psychically on the world. And people have done that throughout history. Like, history is this cycle towards oblivion and annihilation and misery, but then there are these counterpoints that are the human soul screaming out against that. And that's us dragging the world in a direction. But it's just an echo through history that can accumulate or that can be crushed. But it is, our harmony with the world is our ability to leave that impression. Because then one day, maybe, the fucking thing starts off again, and the conditions are changed a little bit, and the chessboard is different. And remember, this is happening infinitely because there's nothing else to happen. Eventually, the lines are going to line up the right way. Eventually, all of the breaks that we need happen. And if that has happened, if that moment has happened somewhere, then it is happening everywhere always. Because it's what's sustaining consciousness. Because the universe is a consciousness. Forgive me, this got very, very, like, dorm room. I'm sorry if it sounds too either incoherent or pretentious or like hippie bullshit, but I feel like it's truth. It feels true when I say it, which is the most fun I have in my life, is saying something that feels true. Somebody asked for the Marxist interpretation of World War I. I would say, I mean, you can say that's Marxist or not. I think of myself in those terms, but also I really do not see it as a Marxism as a doctrine. I see it as a heuristic. It's like a way of thinking about things. So some people would say that means it doesn't count because they want to really get committed to the to the branding or whatever, or the identity of one. I don't really care if I'm called that or not. But I'd say that World War I is the beginning of the beginning of the end of the process, whereby the land-bound classes of pre-capitalist Europe resisted the rise and domination of the merchant ruling class. I'd say if that process begins, I would say in earnest in the 17th century with the 80 Years' War in the Netherlands, with the English Civil War, and then concomitant to that, the 30 Years' War, all culminating in the Westphalia Treaty. It starts there and it goes through the world wars, both, starting in World War I, with the final defeat of the landed ruling class and the land-based peasantry. Everybody has been uprooted and turned into either a capitalist or a seller of labor. This is the process that Marx talked about at length. Capitalism takes the old orders, which were land-based, that were based with relation to specific real land, and there were hierarchies of rule that were affirmed by that relationship, and those were cultural and very much importantly religious, but also just but also structural in the forms of like systems of governance and legal structures like common law in the UK that end up becoming permanent features of capitalism. And in the conditions after the Black Death and the scrambling of feudalism that happened, the breaking up of feudalism's fatal stalemate, because feudalism was stuck in a stalemate at the extinguishment of its viability when the Malthusian shock of the Black Death sort of scrambled the board. Now, it did not mean the feudalism went away overnight. Somebody said that I said that. I did not mean that, if that's what I fucking said. What I meant is that it changed, it shook up the conditions under which feudalism existed. Namely, way more land for way fewer people, with labor commanding a much higher price because of that. And that that destabilizing change of conditions under which feudalism had been relatively stable meant that the class dynamic shifted. And you saw the breakup of these structures that gave dominance to rural ways of being. Because, of course, the peasants, there were things they hated about being peasants, but they would, all of them, the vast majority of them, and this is true everywhere capitalism emerges, peasants everywhere would rather be peasants than proletarians. They would rather work the land than work for somebody else. That is a universal preference. You don't have to fucking... this is another easy one. People would rather work the land than be proletarians. Now, you can look back at the rise of history and or the rise of capitalism and say, but you see, those peasants, their kids had higher standards of living. And their kids had more sophisticated existences, and their kids got to ride around in motor cars. And like, yeah, but they didn't. And it wasn't their kids usually. It was like their fucking grandkids. And they had to suffer for that. And who would want to do that? Especially since they're not imagining depriving their kids of that. They can't even conceive of that. They're imagining keeping their kid in the condition of stability and relative, security and self-sufficiency that they had on the land. They're not comparing it to some future where they have access to the markets, because that's not real to them. It comes later. And then they get to look around and say, well, you know what? This is better than my dad had it, because they're consuming more. And consumption replaces autonomy. Like, our idea of what our best interest is becomes our consumption patterns. And the question of how much we validate the regime we live under is how much it allows us to consume, because that is what we got. That's what they fed us. Now, that's how things start. Once capitalism gets a bite in, though, things change. And then you see this mass move of people to the cities. Now, of course, and that is to participate in the thing that got built there, this new world that is more advanced than rural life, that doesn't have the idiocy of rural life. But now they're comparing it to something that's not true of the early peasants and the ruling lords of the land. They didn't want to cede power to a bunch of fucking commoners, largely in the fucking cities. But they had to pursue the contest over power between the medium-sized states of Europe. And the wars between states that start with either within states within states like Habsburg, the Habsburg Low Country, which is a regional revolt against the Spanish crown, and then the civil war in Spain or in England, and then later on the continent between states and within the Holy Roman Empire, you have these things that are essentially three civil wars that go throughout Europe. The civil war within Habsburg lands, the civil war within the Habsburg lands, both the lowlands and the Holy Roman Empire, and then off the continent in England. And those wars are the ruling classes, the landed classes, fighting each other, and in so doing, building up the forces of capital that will eventually suborn them completely. Not just in terms of structures of debt, but culturally, things like Protestantism, which undermines foundations that were central to the preparation of landed power. And all these capitalist innovations that the landed powers who technically still ruled where they did, all of these accommodations to the market undermined their power in the long term, and they knew that, but they needed to use them to fight their wars against each other in the short term, because these were independent capitalisms emerging along these national identity groups, these national groupings that formed later into secular nation states after Westphalia Treaty. So if you have capitalism emerging as the dominant mode of political economy in Western Europe, where it is able to massively concentrate capital and intensify industrial production and create a more and more refined civilization because of its ability to exploit undeveloped regions and do hyper-exploitation there to allow for mega consumption in the metropole. That dynamic will eventually be interrupted by some sort of crisis of inputs. And that's what happens when European capitalism hits its first big system-wide, European capitalism, its first system-wide crisis that then necessitates, as it always does, economic crisis necessitates conflict over resources among the nation states of Europe, which used to be religious but are now civically national. But the same thing, the only thing that matters is it'll get guys to march out and kill each other over it. That's all that matters. So that means it's the same type of state with the same sort of structures, and it responds to capitalist crisis the same way, by everybody killing each other. And at every level, it is first the ruling class and then the peasants rebelling against the impositions of capitalism. But of course, not coordinated with each other and in fact opposed to one another, which is why they are both defeated in turn. And you have a situation where the old ruling class is stripped of their actual power. They are bought out essentially into some variety of gentlemanly retirement. And the crowned heads of Northern Europe are the perfect example of this. Where capitalism was first introduced, where the ruling class allowed it to dominate earliest, is where was most quickly developed a mechanism to slowly extinguish the power of the old land-based aristocracy without provoking them to rebellion. And that took it took the cutting off of the head of a king, it took the fucking Lord Protectorate of Cromwell, it took the crowning of William and Mary, it took the Jacobite rebellion. But eventually, formal power of the landed aristocracy was converted into capital. They got bought off from power with money. Some of them became powerful because they invested well. Some of them spend themselves into dissolution. But one way or another, they were bought off from defeating the bourgeois and now are just a part of it. One part of it. One part of the new ruling, owning class. The ones who won. Some of them, they're descendants of nobles among our poorest classes now. People who fucked up, who fumbled the bag, and fell out of favor. And now they're on the bottom. For the descendants of the people who made that deal, it was a bad deal. But at the time, it looked good because they could imagine a future where things were better off, which is the exact opposite dynamic that exists with the peasants, who can only see things getting worse. And so they have to be brought along with the stick, bludgeoned into submission, which they are over the course of the, from the enclosures to the suppression of the peasants' revolt in Germany. And then to the socialist movement. The socialist movement that becomes the first coherent class-based counter-hegemony capable of confronting capitalism. And it's like, oh my God, this is something that can actually resist. The working class, the ruling class will just be bought off over time. The peasants will be broken up and defeated because of their inability to organize among themselves. But then the leftovers of those peasantry will then be able to organize as workers. And that emerged, and it provided a flame of tension. And it is in the context of the rising working class that the happiness with which the rulers of Europe went to war in 1914 shows how it contributed to this dynamic of constant, eventual, punctuated equilibrium of violence, where you have these flare-ups. And of course, the French Revolution is key to that. It is the continental sparking of this engine. It is the overthrow of the French land-based rule by the French bourgeois, eventually in the personification of Napoleon Bonaparte. And then you have 1848 coming from that, where finally now workers are able to organize themselves, but only incipiently. And then by the late 1800s, you have a condition where, oh shit, you have a coordinated working class in these countries. They are organizing along their own axis in what is the new version of a peasants' war, but not done by peasants, done by workers who have a greater capacity for self-organization, who have a greater capacity for coordinated activity, and all of it generated by class consciousness, which their peasant forebears were incapable of producing. And that conflict comes to a head. That drive between colonial superpowers who are in conflict over resources to sustain their internal battle with one another while also fighting their internal working class, it led them to destroy themselves in a fit of suicidal violence. And then emerged from that the rise, after this war, of the enraged bourgeois. And what you see in the 20s and 30s is the rise in the vanquished countries, or the main vanquished country of Germany, and then the sort of Johnny-come-lately, who didn't get any of the glory, Italy, this working class reaction, or I'm sorry, this small bourgeois revolt against the large bourgeois. So over the course of the 19th century, the landowners are defeated by the bourgeois, the combined bourgeois. But then after the destruction of the Civil War, or the destruction of the capitalist Civil War of Europe, that it ends in 1918, the crowned heads are destroyed, but the working class is not sufficiently organized to contest for power in Europe, and instead the small bourgeois take the power. And that is where fascism emerges. Fascism emerges as the enthralled and enthroned and traumatized small bourgeois of Europe trying to defend themselves against their own subsumption into the master-slave, owner-employee dynamic that is the fundamental endpoint of capitalism. And then the end of that war is the final extinguishment of the contest, in Europe anyway. The final contest ends in 1991 when the Soviet Union breaks up. But the creation of the EU and the NATO and the UN and the International Monetary Fund and the Bretton Woods system and the dollar and the Marshall Plan, and it meant that political subjectivity had been ceded from the Europeans. They had been bought off, essentially. You guys play together in your fake economy here. You guys can pay each other money for jobs, but you're not the masters of your soul anymore. You're not in charge of anything. Because if you use those your nation states as nation states in this contest for resources, you're going to fucking destroy each other. But the good news is you don't have to worry about fighting for resources because we're going to subsidize you. Us, the United States. The ones who the people who were able to, because we were offcast from your conflicts, were able to synthesize the social order with capitalism and the geography that we found here and turn it into a new headquarters for global capitalism. But that was all predicated on the super profits of empire, which are now being more evenly distributed to maintain the structure, which means that at the center, the treats are running out. And the thing that bought everybody off is the things that bought everybody off are no longer holding sway. Even if you're still enjoying the pleasures of your sweet treat life, you can't imagine a better future for your kids. And so therefore, they don't taste so good. And so we have this now American-led small bourgeois revolt. But political subjectivity was killed in Europe. So now it's all spectacle. Now it's all just a funhouse game we can enjoy. Root for one side or another, well, both of us are annihilated by the machinery that is operating underneath all of this, unchallenged. Okay, I hope this made sense. This was a wacky one. I hope I don't sound too out there, man. I don't want to feel like I'm too wavy gravying it. But anyway, signing off. Wednesday, first 3 chapters of Black Jacobins. Bye-bye.